in this corner, we've got Mr. Ender Clay Shafer himself. I'm going to give him a quick intro. I don't know how much of his story he's planning on telling, so I figured I should do some of it for him. Back in the good old days, he was worked at the company that sent you more drink coasters than anybody else has ever done. That would be AOL. They, at one point, I think, monopolized 50% of the global production capacity for compact discs. Yeah, random factoids. Since then, he's done a lot of different things, been all over the map on the dev side, the ops side, the tech support side. He's got a great view of the whole business, which I really appreciate. Did some math stuff, ask him about Pareto and efficient Nash equilibrium sometime. I'm sure he'll talk your ear off about those. I'm not sure I can properly define them, so I'm not even going to try. He's gone through a number of places. He was one of the co-founders of Puppet. He's worked at Cloud Scaling, Rackspace, now Pivotal, done a lot of different things over the years. While DevOps has many claimants of founding it, he is definitely a very important person to that. Was one of the people. I talked a little bit yesterday about how the Agile 2008 conference was one of the places where it all started, and he was the person who proposed the Agile infrastructure birds of a feather section. That Patrick then tracked him down since nobody else showed up for it, and it's all kind of come from there. So with that, I'll let him take it away.
Thank you, Donnie. I would be remiss if I didn't mention there's also DevOps Days in Pittsburgh next month. That would be pretty good. And then I probably should have said this when I was a sponsor a moment ago, but there's actually a Minneapolis Pivotal Roadshow where you can see some of the technologies. It's basically a mix of kind of presentations and hands-on labs with some of the stuff we do if you want to see how Cloud Foundry works and some of the other stuff we do. It's free. It's on the 13th, and it's in Minneapolis. And if you go to pivotal.io/devopsdays-MSP, you can see some of that stuff and more information. All right. So, Bridget, it's all her fault. She said I should come to DevOps Days Minneapolis and give a talk. Last year I wanted to come to DevOps Days Minneapolis, and this year I did as well, but I couldn't make it, and so I had my full loading head on the screen, if anyone was here last year and remembers that. And what's that? So for me, I've given a lot of talks over the years, and there's this kind of pressure that builds up where I have something I just have to say. And for this talk, in a sense, it's like I'm not there. Like there's a bunch of stuff that I'm in the middle of. Part of it is I'll do something, and then I'll get a chance to reflect on it, and then I'll want to talk about it. And right now I'm really in the middle of doing something, and it's really a period of learning for me and growth. So this is not what I would consider entirely well-baked little idea, but it's going to be a rapid-fire stream of consciousness of. If you've ever seen me talk before, you know what it's about, so just buckle up. So these are the alternative titles that I was playing with as I was thinking about this. So not all DevOps luminaries. DevOps literally can't even. The Dead DevOps Society. Specialization is for bugs. There are no rules. And last but not least, DevOps, a life worth living. Now, Bridget, we're going to make everything about Bridget. She has a particular affinity for war metaphors, and I didn't want her to feel like she was neglected in that regard. But I'm not going to have any. But I just wanted to put that there so you can see it. And Donnie already mentioned a little bit about me. I'm not going to go through a bunch of it, but this is sort of a perfunctory slide where I did a bunch of startups. Since 2008, no, actually 2004, companies I've been involved with have raised it's over $200 million. Some of that was burned in a big fire, and some of that has been successfully creating value. He mentioned Puppet. I did a bunch of OpenStack stuff. I wrote a chapter for this book, Web Operations, which is still probably one of the best books on the topics that everyone's talking about right now. I was probably, in some ways, involved with this whole thing happening. I try, although I'm probably derelicting that duty right now while I'm busy at work, and then I work for Pivotal. All right. Little idea is my Twitter. And we're going to talk a little bit about Twitter. So this is me on Sunday. I gave myself a haircut. And this is the kind of stuff you can see if you follow me on Twitter. You can also see stuff like this. So this is from June 23rd, 2009. And it's at Velocity Conference. And it's watching John Allspaw and Paul Hammond give a talk at Velocity, which is, in some sense, a seminal talk for a lot of the stuff people are talking about today, where the title of the talk was 10 deploys a day. And this is the first recorded use of the word DevOps that I've been able to find on my Twitter, that anyone ever made. And then one of the things I wanted to point out here is this is a word that kind of evolved, but if you go back to Werner Vogel's 2006, he's talking about developers and operators and how the developers have to wear the pager for the things that they put in operation or put into production. And that's an operational consideration. That's an operational responsibility. So while these words kind of evolve and they become a symbol for things that we can share and rally around, I don't think DevOps began in 2006, right? It became a word. And I'd say that's the same with all this other stuff. Continuous delivery, microservices. When someone makes the word, it doesn't mean that thing exists now. It means that it's a word that we can share the symbols. But that usually existed way before that thing. Same with Agile, same with the rest of these movements. This is the other kind of stuff you get if you follow me on Twitter. These are like the two things that would probably be most dev and ops related. So I just grabbed a sampling because I'm advertising my brand here. Any significantly advanced Docker build pipeline is indistinguishable from build packs. We can talk about that in an open space later. And then empathy is proportional to suffering. Engage with my brand. So here's a bunch of talks I'm not going to give today. And it's not that they're not great talks, and some people already gave parts of these talks. And frankly, I feel like every DevOps talk is sort of replaying all the talks I gave in 2008. Not saying you shouldn't go watch them or anything, but there's lots of things that it's new, right? They said that 70% of the people here have never been to a DevOps days, something roughly. It wasn't a scientific poll, but hands were raised. That's what I heard. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can go and see. You can watch videos online about a lot of these topics. So I'm not going to talk about artisanal retrofuturism crossed with team scale and anarcho-syndicalism, although that's a great topic. Test-driven infrastructure. I'm not going to talk about continuous delivery, microservices, and you, although we can do an open space. It's a great topic. The future of containers is virtual machines. You have a platform. Whether your platform is a bunch of people writing shell scripts or not, you have a platform. And then I've also given, these are good talks that you should take advantage of, a bunch of stuff about organizational learning, systems thinking, continuous learning, and last but not least, Pareto inefficient Nash equilibriums, which we could talk about in an open space as well. Now, one of the problems with DevOps is it's so ambiguous, right? Well, what is this thing? And I'm sure there's people in the audience now, they're like, why is this guy even talking? He just keeps rambling. And the problem with DevOps is that most of the time, when you're getting a presentation or even when you're having a conversation with someone, it's a lot like this, where it's like someone has wings and they're flying, and then you're like, why can't I fly? This is not working. Doesn't work. And so you try harder, and what I want to get to, or what I'm going to try to take you on a journey to realize is that a lot of times there's the individual aspects of things, and we talked about, we're going to end with a bang here, but we talked a bit about rock stars, and there's sort of a movement to get away from that and realize that it's about systems and teams. And just to make this clear, Again, a lot of times, you get advice on how to give a good talk, and it's like, make it one point, make it really, really well. We're not doing that today. So just let it go. And there is a little bit of a warning here. It's not quite safe in this room. But here's the thing that I'd ask you not to do. Don't throw stones at this sign. So going back to, and just to give credit where credit's due, Mary Poppendick and Tom, they had a huge impact on the way I think about a lot of stuff. If you haven't read their books, you should go read them. And she's a fantastic speaker. There's a bunch of her videos online that you should probably go watch too. But this is my obligatory Deming quote. I almost always have a Deming quote. Not always, but and it's usually about survival and death and all this stuff. But a bad system will beat a good person every time. Right? So when you think about what it means to be a DevOps, please don't say that. I know. Then what does that mean? And when you see these people that are telling their stories and they're like, they work at Etsy, right? So there's this thing that's going on in our industry right now where people are able to say, oh, those guys are unicorns. So we can't do that. And then, but we want to do that. And so you end up with this cycle where, who's familiar with the innovators, imitators, idiots cycle? So we're seeing the people that kind of did stuff and wanted to do stuff, and it's flying by the seat of our pants, figure it out, really smart, and then that gets codified, and then people are trying to do that by rote, but they don't understand the reason, right? They don't understand the context. So you have to figure out what your context is in that system, and then rebuild systems that give you what you want. So what is a system? I Googled it, and this is the first definition I got. A set of connected things or parts forming a complex whole, in particular. And the question I have is, what's the point of in particular in that definition? Because I stared at that for a while. I was like, I don't know what that's adding to this thing. But this is the definition. You can verify this right now if you go to Google. But the thing that I think about, and Donnie mentioned mathematics, and I did a bit of that, is this notion of inputs and outputs, right? So you have something comes in and something comes out, and you maybe have a bunch of things, and they're all connected together, and things come in and things come out, and those might be microservices, but that is also about, and if you really follow this dialogue around microservices, it's actually, especially when you see Adrian talk about it, the way he's articulating it is really about the impact that has on the teams. Right, architecting for the teams themselves. And so you're thinking about the flows, and it's all one system, right? So it's like you have this system, Conway's law, reflected in the other thing. So when you're looking at your architecture, you can often adjust your architecture by thinking about the org structure as much as you can by thinking about the code and how you're going to package it or whatever. So this is what DevOps means to me, and it's about optimizing performance and minimizing suffering. And I'm going to say globally, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit at the end with I got a soapbox. I got permission to soapbox from John over here. So when we talk about optimizations, when you look at this conversation that's evolved with developers and operations, that's often representing a very local perspective on what's happening in an organization. And sure, there was some dysfunction, and yeah, we haven't fixed all of it, and everyone's on this journey. But when you talk about the incentives that someone has when they are wearing a pager, and then the incentive someone has when they're basically getting paid to add new features, then you can kind of see how that is opposing. Right? And there's definitely, I'm going to talk a little bit about this stuff in a broad sense, but earlier we talked about different types of people and how different types of people have the propensity to favor safety versus exploration or creation. And I think that's somewhat true, but I'm also going to argue that we tend to be a product of our circumstances and our stimulus, and our choices and circumstances cannot always be untangled. So if you take someone and you make them wear a pager every time something breaks, then they might have a bit more affinity towards safety because they don't like waking up than someone who never has to wear that pager, right? So that's something to think about. Now, what I'm going to talk about here is that when we talk about globally, no one that I know of has a full knowledge of everything that's going on. So you cannot really optimize the system outside of the context of your local information. You know, and there's granularity, and there's no way you can maintain detail and go higher level, right? There's a bunch of problems here. So this is a problem that I think plagues organizations in general, and it's not just about developers and operations. It's really about local rationality limiting the scope of information that we have to make good decisions about the systems that we participate in. And particularly systems where we tend to be incentivized either monetarily or by sleep to perform a certain way. And the information that we have changes what we see. There's a bunch of interesting studies where people actually sub-optimize getting information because they think that they're doing things that are data-driven, but what the data is actually doing is fixating what they look at. So they're only driving a single metric without regard for the rest of the thing. So not only do we do ourselves a disservice if we focus only on certain data, and we're not constantly trying to increase the scope and the angles that we're seeing that data from, but you can actually make bad decisions from data because you're not seeing the rest of these pictures. So I'm going to tell a little story. Who has ever heard or read stories about if you take rats and you give them, pick a drug, then that's all they'll do. They'll just sit there and they'll take the drugs. You guys we all heard these stories. And that's not actually true. It's sort of true in the sense that all these experiments were done in this, basically rat housing project where each rat sits in a thing and you give it, here's your choice, rat. There's some cocaine. There's nothing else. Like, there you go. Like, that's the rat's life. And then they think that's science, or we record it as an experiment. That's some data. There's some other things that happen. Who's ever heard of Rat Park or some of these other things? Woo! So it turns out if you take rats and you build them a little utopia where they can run around and play with each other and eat food, there's no scarcity. There's no scarcity of companionship. There's no scarcity of resources. And there's drugs. They don't really do drugs. Like, they might do a little cocaine. but it's not the only thing they do anymore, right? They're much more interesting in, doing all this other stuff because, wow, there's all this other stuff. And there's rats I could be friends with. It's awesome, right? And so this is just kind of trying to frame things as an example where people took a very locally visible set of information and then they generalized a bunch of things about how rats will behave. And then, even worse, then they said that's how humans will behave, or that's the way the rest of these things. Who's ever been addicted to drugs? You don't have to raise your hand. We'll talk about that. Who's ever heard, I think this sort of relates to like this ninja rock star dynamic that people are talking about. Who's ever heard people talk about alpha males or alpha females or whatever in the context of things? So there's these studies that talked about how wolves will behave and how there'll be this dominant hierarchy or hierarchy of dominance rather that changes the behaviors of everyone in the pack, if you will. That's not how it works actually either. So that is something that only really happens in captivity. If you take and you confine these animals and you create kind of a constrained circumstance, in the wild there are packs. There is an alpha male, but that is the alpha male that's the breeding male is actually typically the father of all the rest of the wolves in that pack. And in a natural setting where there's not scarcity, then as the other children grow to a certain age, they just leave and they go be the father of a new pack, right? And that's like this cycle that happens in the normal kind of utopian natural world, if you will. But what I'm trying to get here is this notion of stimulus and response, and how there's an environment that creates behavior, and that the system has as big of impact on what people are doing as any one individual's choices. And there's been a lot of talk about burnout in this community lately, and maybe ways to mitigate that and kind of replenish each of us individually. But the way that we're building our systems right now, our social systems and our org structures, I think, and setting expectations with ourselves and each other, burnout is actually a feature of that system. And it turns out, and you can go read, this is stuff that you can kind of read too, that it's actually somewhat beneficial to be sad, to be depressed. Why? Well, it turns out people in a bad mood, they have better judgment and pay attention to details. And now I'm not saying it's true because I just showed you a bunch of science that was terrible, but this is what someone's claiming, right? This is worth thinking about. And there's an article that's behind a paywall, and it points back to some other interesting stuff, but the title is Depression's Evolutionary Roots, and then the subtitle is Perhaps Depression is Not a Malfunction, but a Mental Adaptation that focuses the mind to better solve complex problems. Something to think about. In an industry that we live and work in where we are faced with many complex problems. So maybe depression is a feature. I never wanted to be a programmer. I've said this before, and it was essentially a function of I'm pretty good at solving complex problems. I'm not saying I'm depressed or anything, but the opportunity to get paid to do something, and I'm going to come back to that at the end with the soapbox, where it's like you get paid pretty well, right? Like let's not lie. Like you get paid, and everyone's like talking about the economy. I don't know if you paid attention to tech lately, and we mentioned we might be in a bubble, probably in a bubble, but you get paid pretty well to be a programmer, and so you want to do that pay thing. I wanted to be paid, so that's why I started to do that. And actually, I think computers are pretty easy most of the time. You know, like, oh, it just does what I say. That's awesome. Like, I need that for my kids now. I didn't want to be a sysadmin for sure, but then, as a function of the first job that I took where I was sort of working as a programmer, someone said, "Well, can you program this thing?" I was like, "Sure." Had no idea what I was doing. And then I was responsible for setting up Apache and setting up all this stuff, and it was a service that he originally wanted to program, but I was like, we're going to run this on the web because that's what I've been reading about. It's going to be big. And then now I was a sysadmin, and I had to learn all this stuff. And then when you get into Puppet and the rest of this stuff, then you got to do this. And you want to deploy OpenStack. Well, you better figure out it's both an application and it's infrastructure. And oh my God, it's very complex and it's broken and it's on fire. And now what do I want to do? So that's actually easier than dealing with people. I don't know if any of you are faced with this currently, but computers, I won't say they're totally deterministic because they're not, quantum mechanics, all that, but they kind of are, for all intents and purposes from the vantage point that we have. You can tell them what to do and they do it. Humans have a mix of incentives and circumstances and choices, and they're a much more non-linear, we'll say, non-linear complex system than the computers that we tend to deal with. So it's all about choices and circumstances. And the original conversation I had with Bridget, she said, we'll come and talk about systems thinking. And it's like, well, I kind of gave 3 hours of systems thinking at Velocity. Yeah, she did go to that. And here's a little thing that changed recently. So the thing that I do for Pivotal as of a while ago now, but I am now in charge of all of the product marketing for Cloud Foundry's business inside of Pivotal. And the reason that I'm in charge of that, and I'm trying to bring, I'm just trying to bring Grumpy into this game, is I think that marketing is terrible. And my career over time has tended to be getting put in charge of the things that I complain about the most. And so then I complained a lot, and they're like, well, why don't you fix it? And now I'm learning a ton of stuff and trying to fill the empty space. And that DevOps localization, local optimization between developers and operations, I'm in the middle of trying to refactor an organization with a bunch of people that have ideas about how marketing should be done, a bunch of people that have ideas about how sales should be done, and how they get information from the engineering department and put it to the rest of the world. I'm not super happy with it, but I'm going to make it better because that's what I try to do, because I'm very positive. Everyone knows me for being positive and non-confrontational. So how many people here love everything their marketing department does? How many people love everything their marketing department spends money on? I basically cringe every time anyone in my company says DevOps. And there's all these things that are happening. So one of the things I fundamentally believe, and this is coming from, and this is sort of why I got involved in Pivotal in the first place, is there's this confluence of things that are coming together, and it has to do with open source infrastructure and agile software development and software and about creating experiences. To me, software, it's not about computers. Software is about creating experiences for human beings. Software is about improving the performance of human beings, improving the decision making, improving the entertainment, whatever. And being able to do that, that's pretty fun, that's pretty powerful. And you can, who's pretty happy with the fact that they walk around with a supercomputer in their pocket that's connected to a high-speed network? Who uses Uber? Who uses Netflix? Like, all these things are technical, right? Like, there's computers involved in that, but it's about that experience. It's about that change in what's happening. So what I would like to get away from, and it'll be a while, is this kind of broadcasting that happens, right? So I just thought this was hilarious, and it's been retweeted a few times. But if you look at what's happening, and you go even to the DevOps Days website, then you say, I want to sponsor, and you click on the sponsor. And I've reviewed, I don't know, literally thousands and thousands of talks for Velocity and DevOps Days and a bunch of other conferences. I organized Agile Roots a long time ago too. And then you'll read these things, and you're like, wow, do you really think someone wants to hear this? Or the best to me, and I don't know how everyone else feels, is you're reading a thing and it's like this person, and they have this great bio, and then it's submitted by their other, like their marketing manager, and you're just like, this is just so hard. So this is one thing that I think applies to everything that I've ever done, and I'm sure it applies to you if you're really learning, but there's like this tightrope that you walk between believing you can do things, having the confidence to do them, and like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing, right? Who lives that every day with their work right now? And then there's this other side of that where the fact, and this comes back to giving conference talks or being able to represent things, human beings are hardwired to prefer confidence to expertise. And if that is arbitraged in every sales process, right? So marketing is deeply broken. I already said that. But everything is your brand too, right? When you read this website on DevOps Days and it says, if you want to sponsor DevOps Days, you can. You probably shouldn't send your marketing people, right? That's what it says on DevOps Days website, right? And so this transition that I think is happening, where you have open source and you have GitHub, and you have Twitter, and you have Agile, that fundamental shift in how we're going to build things, there's just as big a shift in the way people are going to buy things, right? And if you are stuck in this world where you're not connecting people to themselves, then it doesn't actually really matter. Like, no one wants to go buy your thing because you put signs up at the airport. They don't, right? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, go buy Pivotal things. What I'm going to tell you about is about yourself, right? Because really, everyone wants to be awesome. No one cares about your product. And I happen to know how containers work. And I happen to know how networking works. I mean, sort of. Like, I think overlay networking is a terrible idea, but whatever. While we're on this topic, everyone should go read this book. Does everyone know what this book is? Has anyone read this book? Who knows who Kathy Sierra is? So while we're on we'll come back to a topic that got mentioned a little earlier. Kathy Sierra is this amazing person who got harassed off the internet twice now. And she used to do she wrote Head First Java and some patterns books or something for O'Reilly. She used to be a professional skateboarder or something. It's crazy. But she wrote this book recently and she gave some talks about making badass developers. And it's basically some of the stuff that I just stole from her, where she walks through how people think about themselves, how people acquire skills. So it's not even about connecting people to themselves. It's about giving them new capabilities, helping them learn. So when you have something that's creating a difficulty with them learning either what to do or about how to do it, about themselves, about your product, then that's an impedance of them being better. That's an impedance of them being better. Maybe being better is, good for your company. Help them be better. You should read this book immediately. If you're involved in a product, if you're involved in making a product, if you're involved in using a product, if you're involved in marketing, everyone should read this book, Kathy Sierra. It's really one of the books where you read it and you're like, wow, that's obvious, but damn. Like, someone should have wrote this book. I'm glad you wrote this book. So I kind of want to get to the end. I'm running out of time. Coming toward the end. That it's the systems that make people awesome, right? We're awesome people, and certainly individuals have qualities that are awesome, but no one will overcome a bad system. If you take a plant that's healthy and you put it in bad soil, then it will quickly die, right? So you got to take and you want to build the right organizational structure, the right kind of support for each other. And that's the other thing that I think is really magic about what you're seeing in DevOps is the community of practice that extends globally, that can share the type of information. You can go into IRC, you can go onto the mailing list, you can go onto Twitter, you can have the conversation with the people. I am pretty good at a lot of things, but I'm way better at everything because I have a bunch of friends that are even better than me, right? And it's not that any one of them knows everything, but I know who knows lots of stuff. And if I get stuck on a thing, then I go ask that one person, and then they probably wrote the book or they wrote the code, and then it's like, wow, like I could solve this thing in 20 minutes because I'm embedded in this global system of knowledge, this global body of knowledge and practice. And you should be too, right? Like, you're in Minnesota, but you're connected to the internet, right? That's the beauty of 2015 is that you live in a world with Twitter and GitHub, and you can communicate with the rest of this world. So let's build better systems. And let's keep learning and keep helping each other. And right now, I'm trying to build a system and expand it. I mean, one of the things Donnie started with is I've done a bunch of things in companies and started companies, and I did a bunch of technical stuff. And I'm expanding myself right now. And I had an interesting, it's a weird internalized thing because you have this dialogue where you're like, I'm a marketing person now. And you're like, whoa. So there's like this stigma I'm trying to overcome, and we'll talk about stereotypes in a second. But I had a conversation with one of my best friends, and he's better than almost anyone I know at doing this kind of DevOps automation. He wrote a bunch of things, actually probably Very few of you know his name, but he ran the back end of a pretty big system, and he's just quiet. Like, he's never given a talk at a conference, and he's just really good. And I met him early in the days of Puppet, and I've always kind of gone to him with certain things. And we were having a conversation where I told him what I was doing, and he's like, I just lost a little bit of respect for you. And I'm like, why? And he's like, he couldn't actually put a finger on it, but it's like there's such a stigma about marketing and sales, and it's like, oh, we set ourselves as we're like, you know, and I probably did this too, right? Like, oh, those people over there, they're not like us, you know, they're different. But then I perceived, because he just left this place where he'd been in, and he's, you know, he's early there, and he has enough stock that's worth, you know, over $10 million, and he's like, he can do a lot of things, but he was leaving without fully vesting every bit of it. And I was like, well, what happened? He's like, well, I really love computers, and every time they tried to promote me, I didn't want to be promoted. And then finally what happened is, you know, there's this critical mass of managers that didn't like the fact that, like, I knew everything about everything in our system. And, you know, I got on the wrong side of one of those kind of power dynamics, and then it's not like they asked me to leave, but I could just see the writing on the wall, and I just left. And it's like, well, I know that you don't want to participate in politics, but Plato said a long time ago that the punishment of not participating in politics is that you'll always be ruled by your inferiors. So I get really frustrated with my ostensibly smart technical friends that can do lots of things with computers, but they don't understand shit about money. They don't understand shit about marketing. They don't understand anything about this system outside of, like, whatever they put their focus on. And maybe it's because they're depressed. I don't know. But I'm encouraging you to expand yourself and think about the larger systems that you participate in, and how that plays into your own personal narrative, and how that larger system plays into a global narrative. And now, the soapbox. So here's what I want to point out at the beginning of this is everyone in this room is privileged as fuck. Really. Like, be grateful that you can sit in this room and talk about these things. And there's lots of stuff going on, and we're not perfect, and yeah, like, there's bad things that happen in these communities, but if you're in this room, you're privileged. Okay? Now, when I got to Minneapolis, I got in a cab, and I was driven in a cab by a guy from Somalia, right? When I got into the hotel, I checked in, and there was a guy that checked me in, and he was from Somalia. And when I walked to the bathroom a minute ago, there's people setting up the lunch, and they had much darker skin than me, and they were speaking other languages. And how many people in this room are from Somalia? So what I really want to talk about, or what I want to point out, is that we're very, very privileged. And going back to this notion of intersectionality, yeah, there's a lot of things that are imbalanced, and yeah, we can make things better for women, but let's make sure that we're not just making things better for white women, right? Let's make sure that we're thinking about how we're optimizing all of this globally as much as we can. So with that, let's get more people in this room. Let's do everything we can to make, like, everyone privileged as we can. And I think that brings us to lunch. Was that good enough?
That was delightful, Andrew. I'm always happy with an Andrew talk, and this one was no exception.
I tried.
Thank you.